All right, good morning. We're going to get started with the meeting. So this is the second session of the culturally building systems for, what is it?
Culturally responsive integrated
Thank you.
care.
Building systems for culturally responsive integrated care. Sorry about that. In our first Zoom session. So we may run into some issues. If you're having any problems, please just type in the chat to let us know. But otherwise, we think we've worked everything out. So good morning. Thank you for being here. Today, we're talking about implicit bias. You did get some pre-reading and a quiz beforehand. So hopefully you had we're able to spend some time on that. We're going to start by going through some of the responses from the quiz, and then we'll get some more into the definition of implicit bias.
Good morning. My name is Amy Heikkinen, and I'm from Stratus Health. I'm just going to go through the results of the quiz that you all took. Is it right here?
Yep.
Okay.
Gotta share the screen here, sorry.
Okay. We're learning this whole technology.
How do you do that? Let's go there. Okay, Carl.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank everyone for taking the quiz on the Stratus Health website. It is an implicit bias quiz, and I'm going forward a little bit here. And I wanted to, the main reason we have folks take this quiz is for personal reflection, to start thinking about, to start setting up your mind to think of bias and awareness specifically. So I'm only going to go through a couple of the results that showed a little variation. So the first one was the very first question. Microaggressions are slights or snubs, either intended or not. Which of the following is an example of ethnicity-related microaggression by a healthcare professional? And the answer is F, all of the above. So I just wanted to point that one out. We had 16 people say, when you say you speak English really well, and really looking at that it wouldn't be just that, but minimizing the importance of cultural issues, over-identifies with patient experiences, or avoids discussing or addressing cultural issues. Those are all things that play into bias. The third question is also where we had just a couple outliers. Which of the following is not considered a microaggression against an LGBTQ person? And the correct answer there is actually C, which is suggesting conversion therapy. I just wanted to point out that all of the examples show a bias towards heterosexual orientation, but suggesting that conversion therapy is more extreme than a slight or a snub. Oh. And number 8. Number 8 is which of the following can contribute to a clinician's implicit bias towards patients? And here the answer is E, all of the above. Again, everyone is an individual, so all of the above can contribute to that clinician's view of implicit bias. Remember, physician training really emphasizes that group level information like population risk factors and population health, so really getting to that individual care can be something that contributes to a clinician's bias. And in closing for that, okay, now I can't do it. The best thing that we got from this from this quiz that can set us up for today and for the future sessions are really in those comments about, what did it make you think about as you took this quiz? And some of the answers it brought up many specifics that I had not really thought of before. Examining my own biases that I might not be aware of. How it negatively impacts outcomes for certain populations, how vast it is. Again, my own bias. And that it's very common that things that I should think about when making a decision, and thinking about areas of culture other than race. Again, those were heard over and over and over again. And and really important as we move forward with this series. And I'll send it back to Stacy.
All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Bukata to talk a bit about implicit bias.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll talk a little bit about implicit bias, and then we'll go into some of the prompts in particular, asking you what resonated and what challenged you about the material that we shared before today's session. So implicit or unconscious bias, the definition that we like to use is it refers to subtle cognitive processes, for example, implicit attitudes and implicit stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner and without intentional control. And so really important there is that implicit and unconscious bias, as been deemed in kind of documentation, is an outgrowth of our brain's efficiency, like hyper efficiency to categorize. And so through that categorization, we have some benefits, but we also have some detriments, some things that we have to be cognizant of as we move forward. So a couple of things about implicit bias as we move forward. One, it is unconscious and automatic, means that it happens pretty quickly, very quickly, rapidly. It has real world effects on our behavior. So today we'll continue to talk about how implicit bias impacts health outcomes. And so you'll hear more about that as we move forward, but it does have real world effects on behavior, as you saw in taking the quiz from Stratus. It's pervasive, meaning that we all have it. So we should not be looking at implicit bias as it's something that someone else has. It is what we all have as we navigate our culture, our world, and our society. And so that admission that we all have it also could lead to some humility as we move forward in trying to best understand how to work to be more effective at recognizing implicit bias and doing work around changing that. And so the last two I'll share. One is implicit bias does not always align with your explicit beliefs. So if you have implicit bias, it does not mean that you are explicitly acting in a way or your explicit beliefs align with having implicit bias. And then the last one is that it's malleable, meaning we can change it. Important piece about we can change it. According to the Kerwin Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at the University of Ohio State, it says that only 2% of our emotional cognition is available consciously. So only 2% of our emotional thinking and reacting is available consciously. Thus, our reason to be like drilling down on implicit bias and trying to understand more how it impacts, because emotionally we think and we react unconsciously. Only 2% of our emotional cognition we are aware of. And so I wanted to just share a couple more points before I turn it back over to Stacy. One, if we understand the brain and how it works and our mind, context is everything, meaning context in situations and language is everything. And so an experimental neuroscientist, Bo Lotto, does a lot of work around that. And he basically says that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as it's useful to see to us. And that usefulness is impacted by implicit attitudes and stereotypes about each other. And so he really works to have us understand that our context, so that's past experiences, that's notions and narratives that are prevalent within our community and society, and how that impacts how we engage with one another. And then a guy named Michael Bernard with the Forbes Coaches Council wrote an article about implicit bias. And one of the things that he talked about is one of the ways we may see it influence our real world. He talked about the Fortune 500 CEOs, and he talked about how 58% of Fortune 500 CEOs are 6 feet or taller, while only 14.5% of U.S. men are over 6 feet tall. He said only 6% were women, while approximately 57% of the workforce is female. He said less than 1% are Black, and none are Black and female, very few minorities. But he said the way that unconscious bias influences that in terms, because, basically that's the question, do we really believe that like tall white males are more effective in their leadership than women or minorities? Or do our collective agreements regarding what a leader looks like favor the specific people we see in those positions? And so as we continue forward with implicit bias, one, as we review the prompts and also as we learn more today, I want us to continue to try and get underneath, right, some of those things that seem to be a fit, that seem to be natural, that seem to be this natural way of thinking and behaving, because as all the research would show, implicit bias is impacting how we see and engage with each other. So I'll turn it back over to Stacy.
All right, in your the packet that you received of the PowerPoint, you'll see a short video there. We're going to skip that for time today, but when you have an opportunity, please go back and watch that. So thinking about the quiz, the pre-work materials, if you had an opportunity to read through them, and some of the things that you've just heard, we'd like you to take a moment to do a bit of reflection. You can include these thoughts in the chat box for now, and then also when you have more time, put them in your journal. So of the information that you've received and that you've had time to look over as of today, what resonated with you? What sorts of thoughts really resonated with you, made sense, made you think a bit deeper? And then also, which things challenged you? Which areas did you feel like you needed more information on? Or did you have some sort of maybe a negative reaction to? What things were you feeling like you had a harder time wrestling with? So those are the two thoughts we'd like you to reflect on. We're going to keep moving the session forward and turn it back over to Amy now.
Okay, so I know that you have received a bunch of materials prior to this with your workbook and some really great articles and a clip from the Royal Society. So I'm going to assume that we're all great students and we're all up to speed and really just do a high-level review of what implicit bias is. Because I think the first thing we have to do is build that foundational understanding of what it is and how it is formed. And so part of that was taking that quiz and some of those materials. So how do we what is bias? Okay. Systematic error in judgment and decision making, which is common to all human beings, which can be due to cognitive limitations, motivational factors, and or adaptations to natural environments. Biases are large level and it impacts how we see society. They help us understand and categorize the world we live in. However, when we rely on biases or don't examine them, they can impact our thinking when we need to have more of that critical decision making. And we saw some of that in our quiz results. So, what is the difference between implicit and explicit bias? Explicit bias is an attitude plus that conscious bias plus action. So a lot of times we'll see that show up as prejudice or even in large bias like hate or discrimination. Think of those newsworthy types of events. It refers to attitudes and beliefs we have about on that conscious level. But implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So those are those attitudes plus that unconscious manner that we're unaware of that can lead to action or inaction. Okay, so what are some examples of explicit bias? So explicit bias can be refusing to see or treat a transgender patient, not hiring someone because they're Muslim, using derogatory language when addressing a differently abled person. So those are things that are very easy to spot. Okay. What are some examples of implicit bias? Preferring to treat an obese patient's chest pain with the suggestion to lose weight would be an implicit bias action. Assuming older employees can't handle new technology, or even favoring therapy for a biologically male child who wears skirts, okay? One of the, a common example is, of implicit bias is there was a study done where in a science-related field, there was a call for resumes. And this organization put forth 2 exact resumes, but changed the names. One was specifically male and one was specifically female. Everything else was the same. The male resume received higher points after going through 3 different review committees than the female resume. In fact, ended up with actually getting an interview. So we ask ourselves, so, you know, how does that play into it? You know, well, those 3 review groups also had women. So it wasn't just men favoring like men, but women also saw that just in that name. So that's another example of how implicit bias can actually lead to an action. Okay, so should I have them look at me now? So today I'm going to share a personal experience that I've had as a recipient of implicit bias in a healthcare setting. And the reason we have this impact, or have you look at a story, is that when you have a personal story, it connects the heart to the head. Okay, a story conveys your own values, it connects you to your community, and hopefully can connect with folks so that you can lead to action. Yep. Okay, so now that you can see me, I hope, here is my story, and sometimes they can be a little uncomfortable. In my family, we have a history of esophageal and stomach cancers, some kind of rare things. So, which every family has something like that. And because of this, I had to, as a patient, go and get an endoscopy and some GI testing as a routine thing, as our family does, as a preventive thing. And I had to go to the big city, and I'm from suburbia, I'll let you know. I had to find parking in those really big parking ramps, which was out of my comfort zone. And so I go into this healthcare organization, this facility, and I think you can all relate to when you come in, you have that main desk, and then they direct you to, okay, you need to go to this floor or to this lobby or this lobby. So I went to the main desk and I told them I was there for my appointment, 10 o'clock or whatever, and so happy I made it to the right, the GI area. And the woman behind the desk directed me to the waiting room to the left to check in there. So I go to the left and I check in at that desk. And I tell them my name, it's Amy Heikkinen, I have an appointment. They're like, I'm sorry, you're not listed. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, okay, I came all the way down here. Did I screw up? I'm like, oh, you have that kind of brain second guessing yourself. And so I kept saying, no, I have an appointment. So it took us about, only 5 minutes for that person at that desk to go, oh, I don't have you here, but let me check with the desk to the right. Come to find out, I was supposed to go to the right, okay? When I figured that out and there's a whole waiting room full of people there, right? And we know that, when it says stand back so far and so that we can be, privacy, we know everyone in the waiting room knows your business, right? We know this. We're not really good at that. But the woman at the front desk had directed me to the left, and that is where people go for gastric bypass surgery and evaluation, because I'm overweight. When really all I needed to do was get the endoscopy, okay? So is that implicit bias? Yes, I was a recipient, but I could have also been a receiver because of that experience. Now, I did get to the other area. I'm all okay. I went through the testing and stuff, but believe me, it affected me, and that was not a good visit for me. Okay, so that is my story of how implicit bias can affect. It's not just about, what we think, and I don't want to say just, but it's so prevalent. It's not just about gender and race and economics. I mean, it can be about anything that is a part of a person. So the reason I share that story is because think it's, and I'm seeing some people nodding. The reason I share that story, you can go back, is because when I tell that, people say, oh yeah, well, I have an example too. I've been a recipient or an observer of implicit bias too. And on your in your workbook, you have to go here. In your workbook, on page 8, what I'd like you to do after this is to jot down. There's just some questions to get your thinking about. Okay, so how have I seen this show up in my life? Why is it important to me? Because if I can tell why it's important to me, then it's going to relay how it should be important to everyone else. Okay, and I can't get my slides to go now. Oh, here I go. Okay, so where do those biases come from? Okay. We all have biases because we are human, okay? There are many contributors, but we really kind of created 3 categories that they fit into, and that's ego, environment, and experience. So let's look at each one of those. Everyone has their own environment. That's your surroundings or conditions in which you live or work. These can include family, your city, socioeconomic status, power and privilege, okay? That's your environment. We also have the experience. No 2 people have had the same experiences. The encounters, events, and occurrences that you've had in life, and the things you've seen all contribute to how you see the lens that you see life through. And the third is ego, and this is yourself. We often think of ego in a negative way, like, he has a big ego. And then I think, okay, why did we even say he has a big ego? I don't know why, right? But it truly means that sense of self. It's who you are as a person. This is how your mind works. It's your identity, like your ethnicity, your gender, sexual orientation, your IQ. It's who you are. It's the chemical makeup of your brain, your tendencies. Are you an introvert, an extrovert, etc. So we also have a worksheet on page 9 in your workbook for you to start thinking about, jotting down, so what contributes to my biases? So when we look at these 4 images on the screen, all of us are going to see them differently, okay? And that's okay. That's because we're human. But when you look at those, think of your contributors, how they might shape your assumptions or reactions when you look at each one of these individuals. How does your environment or your ego or your experience shape that? Because there are no right or wrong answers. It's what is. For instance, the gentleman on the top left, some people might assume right away, oh, he's at the stoplight with a cardboard sign that says Vietnam vet, homeless. Whereas I might look at it and go, oh my goodness, that's Uncle Harry. So everyone's going to look at that differently. And then ask yourself, well, what would people think of if I had my picture up there? Okay, so we're all constantly recipients and observers and senders of bias when we don't pay attention to that. Because one of my favorite quotes is, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. Bias is learned, okay? As we have more experiences and environmental aspects, our biases change. We have more information for our brain to compute and try to categorize what we're experiencing. One of the examples I have is of my son in 1st grade. I was called to the school because he had a bloody lip from being hit on the playground. And mind you, this is in 1st grade, so I'm freaking out. So I go to the school, and it happened to be the day where they get to dress up in their favorite costumes, around Halloween time. And they're sitting down with the behavioral specialist and asking my son, Ben, who hit you? Who hit you? And he said, well, it's the kid that's in Miss Wold's class. Okay, well, what kid is that? Well, he's tall. Okay, taller than you, shorter than, well, he's tall. Okay, what else? Well, he's wearing a Buzz Lightyear costume. Well, of course, there were 4 kids wearing a Buzz Lightyear costume in that class. And they had to ask him many, many questions when all he had to say was, it's the only brown kid in that class. But he did not think of that. They had to go through many, many things. Now that's in 1st grade, okay? That might be different now that he's a 6th grader and he has more experiences. He's in a more diverse school, etc. So those experiences change the way that your biases are formed. Our biases tend to come out when we're rushing or in stressful situations or when we have any physical pain or ailment as well. For example, if I am I have plenty of time to get to a meeting and I'm on 94 and there's this cute little lady driving ahead of me and I'm thinking, oh, it's so nice that she's still out and independent and whatever, that's fine. But if I'm late for a meeting and I'm behind that same woman, I might be like, oh, she never knows how to drive. And so then I have those biases. Old people shouldn't be out there, driving. Okay, because I know that that's an accelerator for me, okay? So all of those can be accelerators for everyone. Remember, our brain goes so quick. When you look at this is the Stroop effect. And if I would ask each of you, just wherever you are, read the word. We can say red, yellow, blue, green, purple, right? But now when I go to the next slide and I'm asked, I don't want you to read red, yellow, blue. I want you to very quickly say the name of the color. So you'd say yellow, blue, black, yellow, orange, blue, purple. I had to really slow down because I had to think about what am I really looking at here? What am I really asking? And that's telling your brain to slow down and take notice. Stereotyping and generalizations, that passive aggressiveness, really have become a lot of microaggressions. And what implicit bias results in is our ability to make decisions. It might be patient care, hiring, performance management, personnel assessments. Those micro messages are those small, subtle, and semi-conscious, universally understood messages that are both verbal and physical, and they communicate messages to others about their value. So they can include those micro affirmations. They're positive of nature. They value and encourage a person. These are good, especially when used consistently with every person that has the power to affirm behaviors and build positive relations. Microaggressions, however, are comments or actions that subtly or often unconsciously or unintentionally express a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group. This is a negative result. They can directly impact a patient experience and care, also employee engagement. What assumptions would we make if someone needs an interpreter or has a head covering? Those are those aggressions that might show up. Do we have time for this? Is this going to work? I'm going to show a quick clip from the movie Blackish, if it works.
Wait, what?
Sort of.
You've never done a brain surgery before? But you have done a spine, heart, lungs, and eyes?
Yeah.
Well, that means...
But I was hoping you were going to do this. I'm pretending that I don't want this, but I really, really want this. Oh my God.
Well, we're very happy to do it. You are a bit of a celebrity around these parts.
Oh, you're hilarious.
Oh, there she is. As I always say, the party doesn't start until the neurosurgeon gets here.
No one says that. Nice job back there. Oh, the bifrontal craniotomy. That's not an easy surgery for anesthesiologists.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Cole. I just put him to sleep and then woke him up again mid-surgery and then put him back to sleep and made sure he didn't die. So it was nothing.
Now, I don't know much about you. What's your story? Where'd you go to medical school?
USC.
Huh. Yeah. Wow. That's a really good school.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Good for me. Yeah.
All right, you guys, say cheese. Here we go, cheese.
Did you hear what Dr. Cole said to me at the party?
What do you mean?
You were standing right there.
Mm-hmm.
I said I went to USC, and she was like, wow, that's such a good school. Good for you.
Well, USC is a really good school, and you went there, and that is good for you.
Yeah, but did you hear the way she said it? She acted surprised that I got in. You know what it means when people say good for you, don't you? Come on. It means they have low expectations. They think I got in because of the diversity slot.
Don't you think you might be reading a lot into that?
No, I think that's a textbook microaggression. How often do people ask you what school you went to?
Not a lot, and that's a good thing because people are not reassured when they hear Medical College of Tobago, South Campus.
The what?
Yeah, the look on their faces, they just go, well, listen, I think she was just trying to pay you a compliment. Maybe you're being a little too sensitive.
I'm being too sensitive?
Yeah.
That's your takeaway?
Yeah, sometimes things are just what they are in face value. Okay? have a good rest of your day. And what I mean by that is, have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, I get it. It's very funny. Unbelievable.
Hi, I've been thinking about what you said, and you were right. I'm sorry I didn't recognize what Dr. Cole was doing yesterday.
Did you come to that conclusion on your own?
Well, she was loud talking at Dr. Chen because she didn't think she spoke English.
What? Dr. Chen is from Bakersfield.
Mm-hmm.
Ew.
So my eyes are open now. Thank you.
You're welcome. And honestly, it feels really nice to be seen and heard, so thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good. And listen, if I ever do one of these microaggressions, will you please let me know?
Actually, it's a gender one. You have a tendency to interrupt.
Let me stop you there. I think if I did one of these microaggressions, I would know it.
Okay.
Okay, now let's see if I can go back. So when we're looking at those microaggressions, I want to look at the ripple effect. So if we go back to my story, you know, I might feel negatively about the clinic. I might start having my own biases around that organization or around people who look like that woman at that first desk who decided that I should go to the left and not to the right, okay? It could have impacted then the spread to a negative feeling about that whole system, that whole organization. It could also then go even further to, you know what, I'm gonna have some bad feelings about healthcare in general because of that one experience around weight. And that I don't want any part of. And then as a result, my health might be suffering from that. I might not go get those preventive tests anymore so that we could see if I develop what happens in my family, okay? Therefore, I could end up with one of those conditions, like the esophageal cancer or the stomach cancer, way past when it can be treated. So I could really have a poor effect. So I just want to leave with you some quick things about, you know, what can we do? So my individual awareness. We can really look at identifying, assessing, and choosing how we react. And you'll get these slides too. So identifying in the moment and long term, you know what those accelerators are to slow down. Examine those bias contributors that we have on page 9. Ask for feedback like you saw in that clip. Check your assumptions and examine root causes when you're assessing that. And then choosing, you know, employ empathy, increase your curiosity, ask those questions, reframe that perception, and practice some of that de-biasing. We want everyone to be able to, on a personal level, and as we look at organizational awareness, notice bias, confront bias, and be an advocate. And that's my contact information, and we are moving on to Angela. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, God.
Yes, we are. All right. Hello, I am Angela Reed from Turning Point. I don't think, can I hear if they talk to me?
Nope, unless they unmute.
All right. Well, I am, let's see.
And how did you do the slides on the bottom? There we go.
Okay, can I see myself or them? Can you make this nice and easy?
No, they can only see the slides.
Oh, okay. Hello, I'm Angela from Turning Point. Turning Point is a drug rehabilitation clinic in Minneapolis. We are a culture-specific service center serving African Americans. As part of our platform and being culture-specific, we found that it's very important to reach out to the community. The collective is a value of us, a community collective and the health of the community collective. So we got into training because we have a very well-rounded system and have been able to have high numbers of success with African Americans that wanted to be able to work with other providers about creating systems of change, understanding culture, diversity, inclusion. And so here we are. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about institutional bias and, you know, just the power of institutions in general. So we're going to go through some information through these slides, and here we go. So for the first slide, what I really want you to do is, as we go through this, just really think about how this information applies to you. Is it new information? How it can help you in the ways you're thinking, and also the ways that you connect with others. Institutions are our way of really creating policies and procedures that have their own identity. And so you have to think about our independent identity within these institutions. As we go through this process, what I want you to do is to also focus on thinking of yourself as an institution, what role you can play within your work position, and also developing your own personal investment platform so that you can also impact those areas within your community and within your families. And so it's important to know that understanding culture and applying cultural concepts takes dedication and commitment. And it really needs to be over a long period of time. We are a local organization. It's very common knowledge that the African American community is experiencing some of the highest disparities in the country. So I will use that as some of the examples as I approach and kind of go through. So feel free, you guys have my email after this ends, to contact me with any sort of questions that you have. I am trained in emotional intelligence as well. So if you have some questions that are just directly related to some of the biases that you have, I'm trained to answer those. And I just want people to be honest, because there are just some questions that people feel offended, feel like they're being offensive, asking an African American. And so I just want to let you know that I am available for that. As we go through, I just need you to understand that just to get to our next level of greatness depends on the quality of our culture, which depends on the quality of our relationships, which depends on the quality of our conversations. So as we move forward, I really want you to just take an opportunity 3 times to think about your organizational culture, think about where some of the gaps are, and also just to talk and observe your surroundings, media, different situations, and try to get all the concepts that have been given you today conditioned in your mind. Everybody learns through repetition. So this is kind of a first step, but you really have to be invested and start talking so it locks it in versus it just kind of roaming around in our heads. Just start the conversation. That's all we really need for now. One thing I want to address is that you understand, as we talk about institutions and how we're diversifying institutions, that it's going to go in a progressive level. Really, we have to go from basic to awareness, understanding and application, then eventually it'll be integrated. Now, that means it's fully integrated into the day-to-day activities. Management is committed to creating the environment that supports the inclusion and also supports sort of correcting past institutional biases that might be impacting the community, creating oppression in the community, and also are creating low outcomes within specific target populations. And then also it'll become sustainable, how things are done. It needs to be part of your regular business day, to include culture, to include identifying biases, and also within our personal walk as professionals, to go back and kind of rewind our day and see if there are certain things we could have done better, and mostly just to understand ourselves. I used to come into work all the time just moving fast, just shifting, just moving fast. And a participant, like actual coworker of mine, was like, "You never say hello." I consciously hadn't even really thought about that. No one really knew that every day I've been driving about an hour from Shoreview to Maplewood to Minneapolis, and I just needed those first kind of 5 minutes. But I had to understand whether it was a purpose on my part, how it was kind of seeming to others. And even though sometimes I really couldn't change it, I took time to kind of explain it. And people also end up kind of helping me out and making me slow down and forcing me to say hello. So as you guys move towards these things, you're going to go, like I said, from basic to awareness, which is diversity is increasingly recognized. Because at the phase right now where you're going to be we want to start recognizing gaps and to understand the power of an institution. So when it comes to biases and everything like that, this diagram really kind of shows how there's different areas, why it's important to identify things in terms of the individual level, your actions, what creates someone to be oppressed, to feel oppressed, interpersonal, your actions between different people, and we'll be focusing mostly on the institutional policies and practices at the organization or sector level that perpetrate oppression. And I think that's the main thing to really kind of understand in the context that we're speaking of. When it comes to institutions that are based off of unconscious biases, and a lot of time, like on the section below, you have to really know the context of history as well. And so when it comes to society now, and also Minnesota, we have to understand that even though we are a diverse community and have positive interactions, some of the decisions in the past, segregation and all these problems were just about in the 60s, not too long ago, that were created with the purpose of creating division and to uplift one culture over another. So now that there's a trickle down and that we're still trying to advance things, we have to have a different understanding about what has led at least to some of the biases and the oppression experienced by our community. So you have to understand the impact of history. Some things that are very important when it comes to institutional and structure is one important component to always include, because things are going to come up. We're never, be 100%. We're still organizations ran by people, and, everybody has a bad day sometime, and, every organization doesn't have funding to always do every single thing they need to do sometimes, and that's, just how it goes. But it's important to have policies in place that set the foundation for current and future administration to at least go back and check their policies, to check what's going on currently and if it's oppressive, and to make changes. And that's a lot of time in different areas that we're missing. We often end up responding to events within our institution that are creating really negative outcomes after the outcomes have already kind of produced, like at the end of the year. And we'll talk more about some of the measures that you need to value when we talk about these things. So when it comes to diversity and understanding how to address things organizationally, we have to understand that there are many different areas that we can attempt to make sure that our institutions are inclusive. And a lot of them are race, but sometimes if you have an organization that's just not very diverse, and the population you serve is just not very diverse, and so you might have some, it might be hard to tailor services for that individual, but we can always figure out how we tailor our approach to that individual. And when it comes to race, people identify with the institutions that they link up with in very different ways. So I may be an African-American female, but what might attract me to an organization might be the diversity of it, but it also might be the technology. So there's various different ways and why this has to be a larger change, because we really need to be able to adapt to a variety of different areas. And as an individual provider, when you're thinking about your own platform, the first thing you're going to want to do is think about how you connect with someone. In any sort of relationship where you're trying to help individuals change, the first line of business is trust and forming that relationship. And so sometimes I know as providers in cross-cultural situations, it's hard to really break down that barrier, especially when there's so much information and research and different techniques on how to do it. But find an area really where you can connect. And that really will lay the foundation for what you're trying to do. When it comes to institutional, we need to also think about how we're solving our problems, what sort of systems are in place to even identify problems of other underrepresented groups. If people of color are, let's just say 5% of the individuals you serve, it's easy for that 5% to fall off when it comes to the priority. But when it comes to institutional bias, especially when it comes to behavioral health and dealing with people of color, we have to be able to uplift that 5% with just as much emphasis as if they're the 90%. And that's kind of why we end up leading to disparities. We're low in numbers, but high in percentage. And so we have to think about how we are using these processes and how we embrace different ways of thinking and how we also give explanations and how we make conclusions. So for example, I work in a drug rehabilitation clinic. We have to make adjustments as well. Just because we're based off race, we know we cannot even base every single step of what we do off of race. So we might have, for example, clients who are in group and they're falling asleep. They constantly fall asleep. They're sitting there, they're not paying attention. Their eyes are rolling all around. If we're not, as a provider, if we're not, up and knowledgeable on different areas of service, that would immediately make us think that this person is unmotivated, unengaged, is not taking their recovery seriously. Whereas with education, you can possibly learn that this person might actually be a part of the fetal alcohol spectrum syndrome, because high capacity and these, big clinical lights are known to aggravate people who are on the fetal alcohol spectrum. And so you just have to have a variety of different areas. And that's why it has to be kind of a process. You have to be a very flexible provider, and you have to have your institution be flexible as well. And so these are just some of the dimensions that we can control, that we can't control, things we interact with. That's very important to really think about when it comes to how it relates to our institution. Figure out really what you target most. Figure out where you're at now, and then figure out the bottom 5 to 10% who are not successful, where they fit in, and what those answers would be, even within the internal, external, and organizational dimensions. And then you want to customize your programs and take time to focus on that to kind of build it up so we can have higher numbers within all areas and make sure that the institutions that we operate are not creating oppression. Now, there's a difference between individuals who get involved in a behavioral health system who are not successful. That's going to happen. There are some ins and outs with what goes on, but we have to make sure when it comes to institutional biases, they have the ability to create a negative outcome, to create oppression within a group, and to create and foster oppression within a cultural standing, gender orientation. I mean, just like my other provider said, you have the ability to lay the foundation for me to not do something for myself. Maybe I don't want to return to this institution. And that's where we have to make sure that we start to develop kind of a consciousness about it and also have standards for staff. So this is just kind of a little brief information about some examples. A student uses a racial slur against another student. Classism, cultural, Black and Latino students are perceived to be more aggressive by teachers and administrators. Black and Latino students are suspended at higher rates than their white peers. These are the sort of things that these straight line situations right here are just one situation, one interaction. Whether if it happens one time to one person, very few times in the institution, might not be that big of a deal. But when it's perpetuated multiple times, that's when it becomes an oppression. So, for example, under institutional, Black and Latino students are suspended at higher rates than white peers. Now, that might be, an influx you might see over a year, but when you see something like this over 1 year, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, when the new staff comes in, it becomes a standard. So they automatically will assume that if one of these individuals gets in trouble, that the first response should be suspension, because it's been already done at such a high rate. And that's where you lead to some of the outcomes that we have now, where we'll have a number of people who are not receiving the same quality of education because it just has spread like wildfire. We're starting this process now, but we have to understand that there's been an impact of these processes over the last 15 years in all institutions within the United States, mostly just from a lack thereof. And it's having a widespread effect. So it's also important to understand that there are opportunities to influence this area. And there's also effects in all of these different areas. So it's poverty, housing, jobs, neighborhood services. I mean, do we have access to banks? Do we have access to libraries? Do we have access to hospitals? those are all the sort of things that can impact us that were done in probably in a conscious effort years ago, but the oppression that resulted was not expected. And so we have to understand that what's going on in the community now really needs to be addressed in a large number of ways. And that's why we're focusing a lot on health equity, disparities, access, risk determinants, because we also will figure out that they're the same in a variety of sectors. So that's why I really like this model that Tracy is involved with, and that we get a chance to kind of learn together, learn at the same time, learn at the same pace, revolve and analyze ourselves, and also that you guys have a safe goal for someone when you have questions. Because, everybody in the behavioral health field is here because we want to help people. So we know that your heart's in the right place. And it's just a hard context, but it's one of those things that if we are able to get it spread across the board, we'll see a positive effect in our children. We'll see a positive effect in the future. Here's another couple examples of just institutional discrimination and how it's impacted the community in general. And this, like I say, this is not completely race-based. This is based on a variety of things: cultural systems, education systems, justice systems. And then there's different types of biases: optimism, expert biases, and narrowing framing, focusing on a single attribute to make a decision. So yes, it's important to highlight different areas that you're speaking with, if it's African American or the GLBTQ, but you wanted to make a matrix of a variety of responses and needs that would arise within that individual set. Nothing's going to be concrete. It still needs to be able to be adjusted towards that individual, but it's important to have policies in place and to know that this is kind of part of your technique when approaching people. When it comes to your organization, the environment, the staff, the organization philosophy, and the program services and levels of care are very important components to consider when you want to make sure that your institution is not creating oppression. So we learn multiple ways. We learn through hearing, we learn through sight, we learn through senses. And so making sure that we cover all those areas, even if we can't offer a diverse staff, we can make a diverse environment. We can make at least one of the first or main people that they do interact with be a person of color. If I can have an African-American nurse, if I can see an African-American receptionist, at least when we first come in, to bring our comfort level up higher and to understand and be proactive about these things. So as you develop your personal development, you just really have to know your strengths and weaknesses. You have to require motivation and opportunities to practice, and willingness to make and correct your own mistakes. And that's what an institution needs to do too. Just sit back, analyze everything every, couple of years analyze your gaps. Even though it might only be 5% of, your profit, it still is important because it's a majority of the population. And just decide what you're going to address first. Now, there's a little sheet called Understanding the American Culture, but I think one of the main concepts that's important for people within all of this is kind of the concept of time and control. We oftentimes put emphasis on, are they on time to group sessions? Does my organization respond quickly? And to really understand that a lot of times it just doesn't fit into other cultures. This is just some good reading I wanted to give you. It's a great place to start when you want to process. And I'm going to finish up with just some ways to start off your journey. So understand that culture includes expectations, experiences, and philosophy, and they're really what holds you together. A main thing to really understand is that also management is the one who creates the culture, and we really function within it. And so it has to be fostered from the top level on down. It also is embedded in how we react to incidents or crises if we let them lead us to general biases, how we allocate resources, how we teach and coach other individuals, how we reward actions. And that's also included in, how we reward internally, recruit, and how we defined our time. The important thing about this one is I know people see stars and circles, but the important thing about this video is to understand that none of those things are there. There's no star, there's no triangle, there's no circle. So when it comes to biases, it's just a natural concept of what we fill in to make order in the things that we do. And it's based off what we learn. As you go through, you want to make sure that as an organization and your supporting staff, that you address some of the barriers to cultural change, which are lack of support, conflict, failure to communicate, and stress. So do some fun things. People are doing, culture is a personal development in a business world. And so leadership really needs to understand staff that are going through this and really are trying to adapt and address, and that it does bring up some negative feelings at times. And make sure you do something proactively to deal with that. So as you kind of move through with the organization process, work from a well-developed plan. Tracy's plan is awesome, and what MDH and DHS is doing working together is really going to lead us to some really some higher levels. Incorporate principles, create opportunities, and invest in team building and leadership. And also mind the middle management, innovative organizational, find ways to mind the middle without sacrificing executive and entry levels as well. And how you can support. These are just a list of ideas. I'm not going to read through all of them, but actively engage in the diversity effort. Learn about different cultures. Treat people the way you wish to be treated. Drive positive change in the organization and welcome ideas that are different from your own. And just make sure you set a time to ask. As you go through, some of these strategies are going to be how you make the organization overall, addressing some of the biases that has to be developed from a strategy way, a structure way, process, rewards, and people. So does your organizational structure promote power and authority that leverages diversity and inclusion? Are decisions made only by individuals in the dominant population? And is there even questions to ask? So the first place you want to start is, of course, in your processes. So as we end, we're just all providers trying to do our thing out here and help everybody. So baseline, just be knowledgeable, have some good ethical behavior, have self-control, justice, be transcendent, show love and kindness, courage and integrity, and it's going to set the foundation as everyone is kind of dealing with this, because the populations we serve are impacted by our biases, which is making them very hesitant to engage. And we are also focused completely on watching our own behavior at the same time. So just give yourself a little bit of break and just, make connections where you can. With that being said, that's the end of my presentation. Pretty sure I went over, but I hope you enjoyed it.
That's all good.
And then I'm going to close out. So
Stacey's gonna close up. Thank you, Angela. You should be good. Okay, thank you, Angela and Amy. So we have a few minutes left. We'd like to take the opportunity to have you in the chat box share some ideas about what action items you can take on what you learned today and in this topic of implicit bias. So we're going to give you 5 minutes to do that. Go ahead and just in your chat box, write out quickly some ideas about what you might do differently or some action items that you may take around implicit bias. So the question or the just the suggestion was for discussion in the chat box to talk about what are some action items or some things that you might do differently around implicit bias now that you've heard a bit about it. What are some things that you may do differently, or even just one thing that you can think of and take action on after the learning today? So here's a few of the things that you all are sharing. Heightened self-awareness to see things as they are and not as I or we are. Notice it and call it out. Hope to incorporate some of the models as well as the info from the literature to share with my team and with leadership. That's great. Educate others about microaggressions so they can identify when they are using them unknowingly. Says our agency is enacting a diversity and inclusivity plan to the agency as a whole. I think sharing the resources you've provided in the workbook as well as the video that was shared today would be useful. Having the conversations to bring awareness and also discover my own biases. Not to immediately mitigate someone's experience because I feel defensive and do not want to be wrong. I need to discover my biases and work on how they shape my attitude and understanding in my workplace. All right. You can keep typing in there and sharing those. Those are all really great suggestions and examples of what you'll be doing. So I just want to remind you of your workbook. You have the PowerPoint from today. You have the materials that were shared in the workbook to do some reflection on and do some journaling around to keep thinking about this topic and sharing it like you've mentioned. So next month, we have 2 new experts with a new topic. So we'll be talking about, this is on March 20th. And just a note that the time has changed. It's not at 10 a.m. It'll actually be 1 p.m. Our topics are trauma and social determinants of health. And Resma Minikin and Carl Young will be our experts for that topic. So looking forward to that. And it'll be a similar process. You'll get Right on Race journal prompt. You'll get the workbook. And then we'll have the Zoom session. So in between this time and now, if you could continue thinking about implicit bias, look for the materials on trauma and social determinants of health. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to contact the experts that were on today, Tracy, or myself, or Bukata. Thank you so much for your time and your patience with the Zoom session. We'll get it together for next time. All right, have a great day. Thanks.